While I was in Norway trying silence, I decided to have a secondary project to help my mind and my body for training and have something different apart from silence to try while I was in the cave. The first choice was to try Little Better, which is a 9A that starts with the same start as Nordic Flower, Nordic Plumber, Silence and Move, and then goes in a completely independent line on the left. But then, while trying Silence, I understood that I felt good on the second crux of Silence, and there is a route that goes from Little Better to the second crux of Silence that is called Move Hard, which was freed by Adam Ondra while he was trying Silence. This connection is called Move Hard because it starts from Move and then goes on Project Hard, the first name of Silence when it was still a project. Also the fact that the first part is in common with the Move, Nordic Flower and Silence helped me to have it really dialed, and that's why trying to send Move Hard was the best training for Silence for the first part and the second part. Conditions that day were really good and it was a bit cold. That's why I started with my beanie and with my sweater. But I knew that after a few meters of climbing would be quite hot climbing in this condition. But I also knew that with good knee bars I could just take them off and throw them down. This was our very last day in the cave, and in the previous days I felt really good and I fell a couple of times very close to the end of the route. The pressure was high because it was my last chance to send Move Hard. I knew I could send it and I was confident I could do it if the condition would allow me. Actually, the conditions were good that day, but some holes were quite wet. Even in the previous days, before trying the route from the ground, I went up with the Jumar to try to dry the holes that were the most wet. And this routine was a bit boring, but it was necessary if I wanted to climb the route from the ground. Once I arrive to this good knee bar, I do the rope change. That actually is not a real rope change. The rope is the same, but it's just a trick that we do to reduce the rope drag for the second part of the route.
Ok, staccati. Sì.
The first thing I do is to clip a carabiner into my harness with a sling long enough that I'm not hanging on the carabiner. And then from there Sarah can take me off belay while I'm completely safe. From there I pull down the rope until it touches the ground, and Sarah does the hard job to pull the full rope from there. And then she put me on belay again, and I can unclip the carabiner and start climbing again. From here the route separates from Silence. Silence goes on the right, and Little Better, Move and Move Hard goes on the left. The next part is not super hard. The next few quick roads are quite far apart, and I just need to climb, focus, and not to do any mistakes with my hands and with my feet. On the left, on the blue draws, it goes Nordic Plumber that can be continued up until the very end of the cave, which is Nordic Marathon. So this first part is in common with the longest route in the cave too. This rest was not very useful because I just rested a lot on the previous knee bar, but it was helping with my mind because from here started the intense part on a crux that was always wet.
Ok.
Here I had to climb a bit more focus on the holes because a couple of times I slipped just because the holes were completely wet. But before this try I went up, tried to dry them really well, and I felt confident I wouldn't fall here. This section here was not particularly hard, but it was pumpy. along these crux with underclings and crossover moves. Then I reach another bed rest before the crux of Little Badder. The position here was not the most comfortable position for resting, but it was good enough to shake my arms and take some chalk before the first crux. And from here is where the routes divide from Little Badder. So if I go straight up to a crack, Little Badder and moves continue. But then after these hard moves, I go on the right to the rest of Silence and the second crux of Silence and move hard. This crux here is physical but also technical because I have a right toe hook with my foot and then I have to release it and do a huge swing on quite bad holes. From there, I have the second rest of Silence, the one after the crux one of Silence, which at the beginning I felt it really bad and I couldn't release my hands. But after training on it for a couple of sessions, I was able to release both hands and feel quite comfortable on it. It is tricky to get inside the knee bar rest. The knee bar is good once you have it very well, but locking the knee is quite tricky. But in this try it was the time that I felt the better. In the previous try I always felt I was almost falling on my knee bars, and right now I felt really good, and I felt it could be the attempt that I could send the route. This part was the section that I knew the most because it was in common with Silence, and in the previous day I worked a lot on the second crux. But even if I work a lot on it, it was still super hard, and I fell around 3 times climbing from the ground on this section. The first 2 times falling going to the shoulder move, that is the hardest one, and the last time, the previous day, I fell after the crux move because my foot slipped because it was really wet. After the second crux, the rest is not that good. I have my foot locked into a heel-toe jam on the right and my left foot just smearing on the wall. The hands are really good on the right, not the best on the left. And from here starts the last section where it's still possible to fall if I'm super tired. Fortunately, it was not the case. I had still some energy in my arms, and in my mind I was thinking, please arms, don't betray me now. I climbed this section very differently from Adam. Adam is just 180 degrees opposite from me. I use the holes that he uses with his feet, but more or less the difficulty is the same, it's just a different style. Here my foot slipped and I risked a lot to fall, but I was on a good hole, so it wasn't that bad. And then I decided to stay longer than I needed on this rest because I was just too tired and I had to make sure not to fall on the very last part. It would be totally frustrating. My legs were hurting and I decided to remove both knee pads because I couldn't feel my feet after more than 20 minutes of climbing with very tight knee pads. So I climbed the last part free from knee pads and I was quite good rested and 89% sure I was gonna ascend the route. But still I need to do one last scream to make sure I wouldn't fall in the last move. I was happy I could ascend the route and I was happy I was gonna drive home with a lot of satisfaction. So guys, this was our last video from Norway, and now that we are back home and I will probably no longer be a professional climber because I'm becoming a professional YouTuber. So please subscribe to my channel, remember to hit the like button, and if you want activate the notification bell. They said whoever it does will just climb 2 grades harder immediately.
Ah, devo smontare la statica. Hai un rinvio per me? Ah no, sono lì, lo prendo lì. Tranquillo, tranquillo.
Devo riprendere.